Why do we avoid talking to people that we've never met?
It is the paradox that I've become obsessed with. We underestimate how positively other people will respond to us when we try to reach out to them, and as a result can choose to avoid interacting with people in ways that would otherwise be good for us. So we avoid talking to strangers.
That's Nicholas Epley, a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. He's the author of a new book called A Little More Social: How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection.
So we find, at least in our work, that there's a social psychological misunderstanding. We misunderstand how other people will respond to us. We're more pessimistic than reality warrants. But as a result, that pessimism leads us to be avoidant. And when we avoid interactions, we don't learn that our pessimism might be wrong.
And oftentimes, when we do go out of our way to talk to strangers, we make small talk and don't necessarily try to make a deeper connection.
Stick to shallow conversations once we're talking because we think other people aren't that interested in having a more deep and meaningful conversation. And we're wrong about that. We underestimate the extent to which other people want to have the same kind of meaningful conversations that we'd like to have.
So what if talking to the person sitting next to you on the train on your commute home from work, or the barista at the coffee shop, could surprisingly become the most meaningful conversation of your day?
We do have choices to reach out and engage with other people. Some of social connection is a choice. And how we choose to connect with others or hold back from them does have powerful consequences for our happiness and also for our health.
And Epley has seen this repeatedly in his research. Having meaningful conversations can not only improve your well-being, but also your health and even your happiness.
No research I've ever been involved with has changed the way I live my life more than this. Recognizing that other people are often delightful and happy to talk when you try.
From the University of Chicago Podcast Network, welcome to Big Brains, the show where we explore the groundbreaking research and discoveries that are transforming our world. I'm your host, Paul Rand. Join me as we meet the minds behind the breakthroughs. On today's episode, the power of social connection and how it could benefit our lives. If you appreciate hearing from experts in research and science who are shaping our world, please consider subscribing to the Big Brains YouTube channel. It ensures you never miss an episode and helps these important conversations reach a broader audience of learners. This is your second book, and I'm wondering, when did you come along and say, I've got to say something else? And what was it that you felt you had to say or that you thought we had to hear?
The results we were seeing in our work, it's really the only big idea I've ever had about these ideas around social connection. I keep coming back to it over and over again, and I thought we were learning something that I felt like I just had to tell people about.
Your book opens with a story about a woman, Marinella Beretta. And I wonder if you could tell us who she is and why you started the book this way.
Yeah, so Marinella shows up in the first chapter of the book, which is the chapter about social connection. And this is an interesting case. This happened in Italy, where there had been a storm and firefighters and police officers were just out going through the community, just trying to make sure everybody was okay. And they came up on a house and they looked inside and they found a woman there who did indeed need some help, but they were way too late. They estimated the woman had died sitting at her kitchen table 2 years before. The quote from the mayor of the town that she lived in I thought was so insightful. She said, the tragedy of this death is not that nobody knew that she died. It was that nobody knew that she was alive. And that is such a distinctly modern experience, to be able to now live in a world where you can be so independent on any given day. You could go through your life for years and not be so disconnected from people that folks might not know that you were no longer with them. And that, for most of human history, we lived in kind of small groups and you were around people. And you could go off, into the wilderness or something and be lost, but people would know you were missing. And now on any given day, you can spend your whole day without seeing anybody if you wanted to. You can get up and you can work from home. You can order your groceries online, delivered to the store, touch free, right? You entertain yourself at night, reading books, watching movies on Netflix. Never have to have any social connection. We have choices about our social lives that we never used to be able to have. And I think our research suggests that that choice can sometimes get us into trouble.
Well, one of the things that to me was shocking in reading this and then talking a little bit about some of the connecting tissue around loneliness and the numbers of not only older people like Marinella maybe feeling loneliness, but the numbers that were truly shocking to me were younger people's feelings of loneliness.
Yeah. So just a couple of years ago, the numbers flipped. So it had always been that older people were lonelier than younger people, but during COVID and shortly after, those numbers flipped. More young people reported feeling lonely than older people, and that's nothing we've seen in the last 50 plus years where we've been surveying these kinds of things. That is quite a shocking reversal.
And we're going to dig into this, but this is not simply a matter of choice or not choice. There are direct health implications, mental and physical, that go on to this.
Oh, there are. So there are consequences. When I say it's choice or not choice, that we do have choices to reach out and engage with other people. Some of social connection is a choice. And how we choose to connect with others or hold back from them does have powerful consequences for our happiness and also for our health. And these are kind of staggering. The psychologists for decades thought that social connection was sort of a luxury good.
Yes.
So Abe Maslow famously put it in his pyramid of needs up at the third level. Like if you needed food and safety, then you needed security, and then you could start caring about belonging, social stuff. And in the famous Harvard longitudinal study that looked at young men graduating from Harvard College in the 1930s and followed them over the course of their lives, they were measuring all kinds of things to predict long-term success. And the relational measures, how well connected they were to other people, relationship variables, were kind of an afterthought. They had them. They just threw some in just because they didn't think any of that would matter. They measured all these other objective qualities of these young men, and in the end, it was only the relationship variables that really predicted the quality of their lives. And for Maslow, also that his hierarchy of needs has never had really any empirical support. We have a collection of needs that matter for us, and some of which are quite basic. But belonging operates in the very same kind of way that the need for food or sex or other sorts of basic needs does too. When we are missing it, we crave it, and it hurts us, and our body sends us signals that this is a problem, and you need to do something about it, and it's a stressor. And that stressor makes us unhappy and makes us sick and makes us die younger even.
Well, you talk about that we are deeply social animals, but routinely you say we avoid being social. So there's a disconnect there. Why is that?
Yep. That disconnect is the thing that's obsessed me for pushing 20 years now. It is the paradox that I've become obsessed with. I think we have what is at least part of an answer to that we underestimate how positively other people will respond to us when we try to reach out to them, and as a result can choose to avoid interacting with people in ways that would otherwise be good for us. So we avoid talking to strangers, we find, at least partly because we think other people aren't that interested in connecting with us. And so we hold back and avoid. We stick to shallow conversations once we're talking because we think other people aren't that interested in having a more deep and meaningful conversation. And we're wrong about that. We underestimate the extent to which other people want to have the same kind of meaningful conversations that we'd like to have. We can do acts of kindness for other people that connect us with them, but we think it doesn't matter as much as it actually does. Express our gratitude, but we underestimate how positively it'll leave people feeling. So we find, at least in our work, that there's a social psychological misunderstanding. We misunderstand how other people will respond to us. We're more pessimistic than reality warrants. But as a result, that pessimism leads us to be avoidant. And when we avoid interactions, we don't learn that our pessimism might be wrong.
You and I are both talking from Chicago, and at least I have spent plenty of time on commuter trains. But you did an experiment with Julietta Schroeder on the Chicago trains. And I wonder if you could tell us about that and the data that you got and why it was a bit surprising.
Yeah, so all of this work that goes into a little more social. I mean, my interest in social cognition and mind reading, how we understand the minds of others, is long standing. But I had this eureka moment one morning on the train when I was commuting in on the metro, which I do every day when I go into work, and was writing a chapter for my last book for MindWise, and sitting there describing how we got these brains uniquely equipped for connecting with other people, made happier and healthier by connecting, and yet looked around on the train and here we all were ignoring each other, right? And that's exactly the kind of behavior that gets psychologists thinking, why are we doing this? Like, does this make sense to someone? How can I explain what's going on here? And so we started running some experiments on the trains, and they were very simple. The first ones that we did, we recruited one group of people, and this is from the Homewood, Illinois train station, so just north of where I live. I'm in Flossmoor on the far south side. Homewood is just north of us. It's got an underground entryway, which is critical so that your research assistants, when we're running this in February in Chicago, do not freeze to death. Juliana did not want to freeze to death. And so we went to that one underground. And we recruited people and randomly assigned them, commuters, randomly assigned them to do one of three things on the train that morning, either to keep to themselves in solitude, just focus on their day ahead, to do whatever they normally do, which is typically keep to themselves and focus on their day ahead. Or the third condition, we ask them to try to have a conversation when a person comes and sits down next to them, right? Try to make a connection, okay? And then gave them a survey. This was back in the old days. Now we do this on surveys, but this was like 2011, 2012, right in there. And so they had paper surveys that we gave them. They opened up the envelope at the end of their commute, pulled out their $5 Starbucks gift card, which was their incentive for participating. And then they filled out this survey, essentially reporting how well the commute had gone, how pleasant it was compared to normal, how happy they felt, how sad they felt. And what we found was that the commuters randomly assigned to try to have a conversation with a stranger actually reported having the best commute. And those we randomly assigned to keep to themselves and focus on their day ahead reported having the worst commute, the least positive. But when we recruited another sample of commuters and asked them to predict how they would feel, the reason why people choose not to connect became clear. Because when we asked people to predict how they would feel, they predicted exactly the opposite results. They thought they'd be happiest keeping to themselves and thought they'd be the least happy talking to a stranger. And their beliefs just weren't wrong. They were precisely backwards. But people were behaving in a perfectly rational way in alignment with them. They were following their beliefs about what would make them happy. It's just those beliefs were off.
Well, you talk about it as the choice.
Yes.
What's the choice?
The most important choice we make in our daily lives is the choice, the decision to reach out and engage with somebody, to approach them, or to hold back and avoid them. Our social lives depend on how we make that choice over and over and over again in our lives.
Well, one of the things that I'm willing to bet many of our listeners are familiar with was the whole idea of the 36 questions. And I wonder if you can tell us about walking into a room of hedge fund executives, what they looked like and what it felt like in that room.
These questions came from Art and Elaine Aron. Back in the 1990s, they developed a procedure in the lab to make people closer. It was a series of questions of escalating intimacy. They actually thought you needed a long runway to do this. I think that's actually not true. And they also had a bunch of other beliefs about what connects people. They thought you had to be similar to each other and really be trying to connect. None of that was true. All that mattered was, are you asking meaningful questions? Are you discussing meaningful stuff or not? And so I was interested in why, if these deep conversations are better, just like if our commutes when we connect with someone are better, why are we so rarely asking people, if I was going to become a good friend of yours, what would be most important for me to know about you? Or can you tell me about one of the last times, Paul, that you cried in front of another person? I'm betting you've never asked somebody that, or at least not that way. If those are the things that connect us, why aren't we having those conversations, right? So I thought I would test it to find out, a little like I did on the trains. And I had run a lab study on this. And so I wasn't just coming totally out of the blue. You know, our undergrads, when they asked deeper conversations, they underestimated how positively it would go. And so they thought it would be more awkward than it actually was, that they wouldn't connect as much as they actually did. And those gaps were bigger for the deep conversations than they were for smaller, small talk. But to go out and run it in the wild is a different animal. And I was out speaking at a conference, a financial decision-making conference at a hedge fund on the East Coast. And I thought, I'm going to run this here for real as part of my session. And right, the folks who were in the session, they did not know what they were in for, right? These are all like pension fund managers, C-level executives running these massive funds. They're here for, quant jock upbringing. That's what they want. They want to have their math skills tweaked. And here was touchy-feely going to come in and have them talk about the last time they cried. So they didn't know what was coming. I started into my talk. And a little ways in, I told them, I'm going to run an experiment with you right now to show you some of these effects rather than just tell you about them. And of course, in my own mind, I was like, 51% confident maybe that it would work. And I thought this will probably work, but the confidence I had on it was low, and this could go really well, or this could be a total nightmare, like the worst talk I've ever done. But you never get anything without swinging. So I put these questions up on the board. If a crystal ball could tell you anything about your life, what would you want to know? And can you tell me about one of the last times you cried in front of another person? I put this up on the screen. Tell people in just a minute, I'm going to pair them up with another person and have a conversation about this. And I'll never, ever forget this. Toby Moskowitz, one of our faculty, was sitting in the front row of this talk. And right next to him was some other guy who hollered out, shit, as soon as I put that up on the screen. I apologize for any young listeners here. That is the truth of what happened. And the whole group just erupts in laughter, right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a nightmare. Nevertheless, we continue. They go to a survey. They tell me how they think the conversation is going to go. They think it's going to be terrible. I pair them up. They start talking. And I'm telling the guy who's running it, let's let him talk for like 10 minutes or so, then we'll bring him back. Well, at 10 minutes, the room was on fire. Like, I've never seen a room switch like this.
Amazing.
From being kind of dull and dour to just coming alive. These folks were deep in conversation with each other. I said, okay, well, let's wait another 5 minutes. It was still going strong. And then I'm struggling for the next minutes. 2 minutes left. And I probably said 2 minutes left, 3 minutes in a row.
Right.
But then once they were talking, they didn't want to stop.
So what did this tell you?
It tells people, it told me, just like on the trains, that our beliefs about these social interactions aren't just wrong, they're really wrong. People want these kinds of conversations. It's not that they don't. You ask people, how deep do you want your conversations to be? How deep are the conversations you're having? They say, I'd like much deeper conversations than I'm having. It's not that they don't want to have them. It's that they think other people don't want to have them, right? And they're really, really wrong about that. Once they actually take an interest in another person and they try having this conversation, they find other people are often just as willing and happy to open up and engage with them as they would imagine they would be. And so those expectations are way off in ways too that keep us stuck in way too much small talk in our lives. This is a hypothesis we're just starting to look at. In fact, as we're talking today, the data just came in this morning for this master's project that we're working on, where we hypothesize that people are actually more willing to open up and reveal things like secrets to strangers than they are to people that they know well. I think there's a strong intuition that's likely true.
Yes.
I suspect we will confirm that, and we're going to try to understand why that is. I do think, though, that there is something that can be magical about strangers that people really don't utilize.
You introduced a new term in this book. There's a few, actually. One was homo socialis, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah,
and
sure.
you think that that's better than homo sapiens. Tell me what homo socialis means.
It highlights the inherent sociality of our nature. That's what really makes us special, is our ability to connect with other people. That's the reason, Paul, why we have such big brains, in fact, is because it's required for a highly social species to be able to live in these complicated social networks that require you to know who to trust and who to approach and who to avoid and to remember who knows what and to create these cooperative alliances. That requires a lot of neural capacity, and our great big brains show that. So you see the social nature of our beings etched into the size of our brains relative to our nearest primate ancestors. We're also super social in that we can care for non-kin in ways that other species just do not to the same degree. So, I mean, look, all of these are matters of degree. Other primate species also think about the minds of other primates too, but not to a level that we do. And that's also true of caring. Kin selection gets you a long ways in evolutionary terms, but we do things that no other primate species does, at least to the same degree. We care about strangers, right? We adopt non-kin into our family, like we have done 3 times into my family, and they become part of your family every bit the same.
You are teaching MBA students. You've lectured to hedge fund managers and others. I'm willing to bet at least one person in those groups thinks that money's going to buy them happiness.
Sure, sure.
And there is a famous study with Kahneman and Deaton that looked at this question, and maybe it was relevant to those groups. Can you talk about that study and what surprised you about it?
So there are lots of data that look like the Kahneman and Deaton study, or their paper. What Kahneman and Deaton, though, did, what they had that others don't, was the ability to compare the effect of money on happiness compared to lots of other things. And that's what makes it interesting. So Kahneman and Deaton, this is a 2010 paper. Danny Kahneman and Angus Deaton were both Nobel Prize winners in economics, although neither of them were economists themselves. And what they did was they analyzed the Gallup Daily Well-Being Survey. So every day Gallup surveys a few thousand people and basically asks, hey, how were you doing yesterday? That's kind of what it is. They look back yesterday and they're asked questions about, did you smile yesterday? Were you feeling happy yesterday? Were you feeling stressed yesterday? A bunch of questions about well-being, both positive and negative. And they then ask a whole bunch of other questions too, like how much money do you make? Did you feel alone yesterday? Is it a weekend or a weekday? Are you religious or not? These kinds of questions. And what Kahneman and Deaton did is they can then create, they can find out how big of an effect does the amount of money that you make matter for your, say, positive affect. Right? So smiling yesterday, feeling enjoyment yesterday. That's what the measure of well-being is. And they found that, yes, money does bring some happiness. Yes, it does. Right? That is like a one-item IQ test. Yes, absolutely does. Most of the effect is down on the lower end.
Yep.
It peters out. It continues to rise logarithmically. What that means is very slowly. But all of the action is really down on the low end of this. Getting out of poverty.
Getting your needs covered.
Exactly. Being poor really stinks.
Yeah.
Being wealthy is better than being moderately wealthy, but not so much. But the effect is there, but it's not huge. But then what they could do was they could compare the effect of being relatively wealthy or poor against being relatively high or low on a bunch of other variables too. Like, did you report spending the entire day alone yesterday? And you can now compare people who are relatively high or low in income, and they did this by doing basically a median split on their data. Now you've got an index variable there. And you can compare the effect size, the difference between those two groups. Between, say, the difference in people who reported feeling alone yesterday or being alone yesterday versus not being alone yesterday. And it turns out the difference in that alone question between being alone yesterday versus not, 7 times bigger effect on your reported positive affect yesterday than being relatively high or low in income.
Yeah, big number.
So it's not that money doesn't matter. Of course money matters. Right? Money matters. But the really big thing that matters is, am I with other people or am I alone? What are my social relationships like? And time again, it's a little hard to say, is our social relationships more important than money? Certainly some analyses like this one show that they are, and way more important. But these are kind of apples to oranges comparison. The easy thing to say is that if I want to know how happy you're feeling in your life, how satisfied you are in your life, a really important thing, arguably the number one thing I want to know is, what are your relationships like? How much time are you spending alone? That's going to matter.
Well, I think you've done a really great job of setting the foundation for the need and the importance of social connection. And you also get into the book that there are some things that can be done. If people look at this and say, I get it. but
Right.
I'm just uncomfortable with it. What do you tell them?
Yeah. First place I would suggest to start is to change a little bit how you're thinking about happiness and well-being. I think this is really important. You can then look back to yesterday, say, and do what we refer to as a choice audit. Were there moments where you were keeping to yourself, just kind of wasting time, but you could have connected with somebody else? You could have picked up the phone and called somebody, maybe when you were commuting home on, in the car, or you're sitting in you're walking through the hallway of your office and you could have invited somebody to come to coffee with you and you didn't. Or, I'm riding on the commute on my way in on the train in the morning and I could have said hi to Susan sitting next to me or Harold across the way from me, but I didn't, right? And there you'll start to see things you can work on, little actions you can do. And that's where you start.
The point of doing any of these things is a fear of rejection. And you tell a story about somebody that decided he was going to go with that sensitivity training on rejection and just make sure he never felt bad about it again.
Yeah. This is one of my favorites. I've gotten to know this guy quite well. We've had a number of conversations. Jia Jiang is his name. He wrote the book called Rejection Proof, which I recommend to people. And there are videos online. If you go to rejectiontherapy.com, you'll see some of these videos. Yeah, he decided that he was an aspiring entrepreneur, but was too nervous about being rejected. And he decided he was going to follow the cognitive behavioral therapy protocol of exposure therapy, which means essentially throwing yourself at your fears and experiencing them over and over again. Well, he did those things. He developed, he did this over 100 times, in fact. He videotaped them all, and the videos are priceless. He's posted them online. He starts off being successful. He tries to get rejected, and he does. First thing he does, he goes and asks a security guard working outside a bank if he could borrow $100. The guy kind of laughs and chuckles and says, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have $100 to loan you right now." And Jiao walks away, and he says, that wasn't that bad. I was rejected, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it would. By day 3, he starts to fail. And this one is beautiful. He's in Atlanta. He goes into a Krispy Kreme donut store and asked the woman behind the counter if he could get Krispy Kreme donuts in the shape of the Olympic rings. Right? And she doesn't remember what the colors are. So she sits down, she starts writing down the shapes. He's sure he's going to get rejected, right? Just 100% she's going to say, get out of here. We don't do that, idiot. But no, she sits down, like in her thinker pose. You ready? You see it on the video. She's trying to process this. She says, give me 15 minutes, I'll come back. 15 minutes, she comes back with a box of these. She's almost embarrassed, though, because she thought she could have done a better job. But these donuts are beautiful, colored, 5 rings interlocking. It was amazing. And in the voiceover of his video, he says something to the effect, I quote it in the book, but I don't have it top of mind right now, something to the effect of, and this is why humanity is worth saving.
Right.
And he continues, right? And by the end of it, we actually analyzed all his videos. He didn't know this. He didn't know this. He was actually, his outlandish requests go into a private airline, a private airport, and ask if he could co-pilot a plane. He's never flown one before. Yes, he can do that. He's in Southwest getting onto a flight and ask, can I do the safety announcement? No, you can't do that. But you can get up and address the plane if you want. He goes up to a house in Texas and asks the guy, can you take a picture of me playing soccer in your backyard? No problem. He walks up to a woman, he's got a rose, a potted rose. Can I plant this rose in your front yard? She's delighted by it, just over and over again. And it turns out that his outlandish requests are accepted more often than they are rejected. He's actually accepted 51 times, 48 times it's a no. But even out of those no's, many of them were very gentle. Almost none were negative. I think we detected negativity in only 7 of the rejections. Most of them were super nice, or they were doing things like, they couldn't do one thing he asked, but they allowed him to do something else. He goes into Costco and he asked to speak over the loudspeaker to tell everybody how much he loves Costco and how proud he is of all the workers. And the manager says, look, I can't have you do that, but we can sit down and have pizza here. So he comps him lunch and he gets to talk to the manager about how much he loves Costco, right? So Gia, he said that he did in fact lose his fear of rejection, but not because he developed thicker skin, but because he learned that other people are just way more helpful and kinder than he thought they were. It changed not himself, but his view of human nature. And he came to describe that to me later when we were talking about it. He said, Nick, I've come to feel like I have a superpower that other people don't have. I'm just not afraid of other people.
That's really cool.
Right? And of course, he got that from life.
That brings me to what I think is your third virtue, which is honesty. And in talking about honesties, you do make a distinction between self-protective lies and what you call pro-social lies.
Yeah.
Tell me why that honesty is a virtue in your world.
Yeah, so this work here, this chapter is really based very heavily on work that my wonderful colleague at Booth, Emma Levine, has done. But lots of other researchers as well. I talk about Michael Slepian, who studies secrecy, for instance, in that chapter. And we often think about lies in ways that are harmful to other people. They're selfish lies. I'm lying to you to protect myself in some way, or I'm lying to you to mislead you in some way. But there's a whole nother category of lies, of deception, that are benevolent lies, or white lies, they're called, right? Which are meant to not actually hurt you, but to help you. So, a student hands me this paper and I think it's terrible, but I don't think the student could handle that. So I actually tell the student it's great, right? This is a case where you have an ethical dilemma, right? Where, as Emma points out, benevolence, the desire to be kind to somebody, and honesty, the desire to be truthful to somebody, come in conflict with each other, right? And what Emma documents, though, is that who's the one who sits down with you and says, Paul, that talk you gave just wasn't as good as it could have been. We're going to make this better, right? We're going to strengthen you. And when people give those kinds of pro-social lies, they think they're being nice to another person. The other person is actually evaluating that more negatively. And what they misunderstand is that when they're truly honest with somebody, we have people confront a partner in conversation about a difficult thing they're going through that they haven't brought up to the other person. Those constructive confrontations are received much more favorably than people expect beforehand. Emma finds that people spending a day being as honest as they can be in their relationships, they think that's going to leave their relationships worse off. In fact, it leaves their relationships better off at the end of the day and about on par with being as kind as you can be to other people. And so one barrier then to being honest is misunderstanding that it's often interpreted as kindness, because it is kind. It is kind,
right,
to be honest with someone.
If you're looking and trying to provide a guide of what a life of meaningful social connection actually looks like, how would you describe that as what ought to be something that becomes a goal?
So here I'll talk a little more personal, because I don't have research on the totality of it, but I think the picture that emerges from all of our data is one where you just walk around with a little more optimistic and empowered sense of what other people are like and how you can interact with them. The ability that you have moment after moment, day after day in your life to create connections with other people. No research I've ever been involved with has changed the way I live my life more than this. Recognizing that other people are often delightful and happy to talk when you try. That I've got amazing power to lift people up with a kind word or an expression of gratitude or passing along a third-person compliment or taking an interest in somebody else has just flat out made me a friendlier person. A more decent human being, I think.
Nice.
And I'm not only more likely to approach other people, I also think it has made me more approachable by other people. I know people's names because I take an interest in them and I write it down because I care. I think that's what the consequence of this looks like if you really come to realize the power you have to connect with other people and the positive impact you can have on other people, and the likelihood that they'll reach back to you if you reach out to them first. It kind of changes all your relationships for the better.
I love that. Really nice. The book is filled with all sorts of wonderful stories. There's one toward the end of the book about bit of a metaphor with Uncle Rufus and his cows.
Yeah. So the key, a key challenge here is taking behavioral science research and applying it in our lives, right? How do you do this, right? The pessimism that holds me back might not be the thing that's holding you back, right? The opportunities I have to connect with other people might not be the same opportunities that you have, right? Men and women live in different worlds. What a woman might do to connect with others might be different from what a man may do. So all of those things are true, right? There's a lot of individual artistry to this. And I use this analogy of my great uncle Rufus's cows. He lived across from my grandpa and grandma Floyd and Justine, and in the summers I'd always spend some weeks up on the farm, and I used to love going over to look at Rufus's cows. Rufus was this stodgy old kind of farmer, but with this huge heart, and his wife, my Aunt Betty, was just a lovely human being. But every now and then Rufus's cows would end up on Grandpa's side of the road. And the way they would do that is they'd walk along the fence and they'd kind of lean into the fence posts until they found one that was kind of in a low spot, that was wet, that was soft. And then they leaned into it hard and pushed it over, and that's how they got out. And I think that's a good analogy, Rufus's cows, for how we ought to test these beliefs in our life. Find the ones that you think maybe are likely to be the wobbliest, the bits of pessimism, that your coworkers don't want to have coffee with you, or wouldn't want to sit at lunch with you, or the people who are your neighbors might not want to talk with you. Find the easy ones and test those first, right? There are a lot of hard things that you can do, right? Hard relationships you can try to repair, or hard conversations you can try to have. Start with the easy ones. Follow Rufus's cows and test the easy barriers first, and see if you can knock those over, and then you can maybe get a little courage to go to the harder ones.